For 10 long years she had watched the sky from the same cold spot, beneath the rusted canopy of the colony's lower deck, her back against the wall where shadows lingered even during high sun, her legs lifeless like forgotten cables, her arms thin and shaking from pulling her body inch by inch when the rainwater gathered too close to her fragile frame. She had once run faster than anyone in her training cohort. They used to call her wind-footed Jelena, now they barely remembered her name. The doctors said her spinal cords were too damaged. The metal from the shuttle crash had severed the neural links beyond repair, and even if the surgery was somehow possible, her species didn't regenerate like humans did. No one volunteered to build her a chair with wheels, so her father used leftover cargo crates to make something she could sit on. But the wheels jammed after the first week and no one came to fix them. Her eyes, once bright with dreams of being a planetary scout, had dulled into mirrors of silence. Every day she stared at the same crack on the ceiling above her, and every night she listened to the power converters hum as the sky shifted into purple dusk. The world moved, soldiers marched, ships landed and departed, and she sat, unmoving, unseen, until one morning, when the air changed with a strange chill. She noticed someone standing still in the middle of the deck, not walking past her like the others, not pretending she was part of the crates, not averting his eyes out of shame or discomfort. It was a human, young but weathered, with sleeves rolled up and grease stains on his collar. He looked at her the way mechanics looked at broken engines. Not with pity but curiosity. He didn't say anything at first. Just knelt beside her broken wheels and tapped the side of her seat with his knuckle, like he was checking for a heartbeat. She stared back, confused, waiting for the moment he'd laugh or walk away, but instead he asked her a question no one had asked in years. "How did it happen?" he said, his voice rough like he hadn't used it in days. She didn't answer at first, because she didn't know if he really cared, but something in his eyes made her speak. Her voice cracked from disuse, but the words came anyway. "Ship fragments, dorsal crash, spinal cut, tech unrepairable, colony medic gave up." The human nodded slowly, then sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. Ignoring the stares from guards and passers-by, he didn't offer her food, didn't say he was sorry, just pulled out a device from his belt and scanned her lower body. "You've got remnants of a neural dock still intact," he muttered to himself. "The colony's full of junked parts." "Maybe," she blinked, unsure what he was doing or why he even cared. She tried to speak again, but he was already walking away, fast and focused. She thought he was gone for good, another fool chasing a broken dream. But the next day he returned, this time with wires slung over his back and a small energy core humming in his hand. People whispered, said he was wasting his time, that the paralyzed girl was beyond saving. But the human didn't listen. He just began working, day after day. He came back, checking the wiring near her spine, attaching temporary connectors, testing responses with sensors taped to her knees. Sometimes she screamed from the shocks. Sometimes she laughed, because she felt something, even if it was pain. He never asked her why she wanted to walk again, never asked her what she'd do. If he succeeded, maybe he already knew, or maybe he didn't care. Maybe he just wanted to prove something to himself. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the engine towers and bathed the deck in copper light, he brought something strange, something heavy wrapped in cloth. She asked what it was, but he just smiled and said, "Today we try the legs." Her breath caught, her hands trembled, her heart pounded like it wanted to run before her legs did. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing two metallic limbs unlike any she'd ever seen. Not polished or pretty, but strong and sharp-edged, cables exposed. Steel scratched with symbols she didn't recognize. "These aren't made for your kind," he said. "They're old war tech, made for humans, but I've modified the interface." He hesitated, then asked, "You still want this?" She nodded without thinking. Not because she believed it would work, but because she'd already chosen long ago that she'd rather die trying to stand than live another day in that corner. He powered the legs and brought them near her, began connecting them one by one. Each click and spark sent tremors through her nerves. Her teeth clenched, her body jerked. The pain was unbearable, yet she didn't cry out. She bit her tongue until it bled. Then something shifted. Not in the machine, but in her spine. Something connected. Something aligned. Her toes moved. Or at least she thought they did. The metal responded with a whir. And she could feel weight where she had felt only emptiness. The human stepped back, nodded, and said, "Try." She braced herself on the wall. Her arms weak but determined, and with a grunt she pushed. Her legs jittered, then held. For one terrifying moment, she stood, trembling, gasping, eyes wide with disbelief. Then she fell, hard. The shock rippled through her body. The legs locked to prevent damage, and the human rushed forward, but she laughed. A strange and broken sound, because she had stood, even if only for seconds. The guards stared from a distance. Someone reported the illegal tech. Someone else warned the commander, but none of it mattered to her in that moment. Because for the first time in 10 years, Jelena felt like she wasn't forgotten, like she wasn't broken, like she was alive. And the human, whatever his reason, had just started something that no one could stop now. Not the colony, not the laws, not even the ghosts of her past. She had stood, and she would walk again, even if the world burned around her, even if the legs were made for war, even if the human never returned. Because now she knew she could move. No one knew where the human came from. No one had assigned him to the colony. No registration, no clearance, no uniform. Just a name scribbled on a worn ID tag that read Callan. And even that looked burned halfway across. His presence was ignored at first, just another scavenger picking through metal heaps and discarded cores. The kind of wanderer who traded spare parts for stale rations. The kind the colony tolerated but never welcomed. But he kept coming back every single day. Always walking with the same quiet steps. Always vanishing into the junk sectors before anyone could question him. And always returning to that same girl lying against the wall like broken furniture, forgotten by everyone else except him. Jelena watched him each time, unsure if she should feel hope or fear. His hands were calloused, his eyes tired. But every time he looked at her, there was something sharp behind his silence, like a fire that refused to die even in the cold vacuum of apathy. The others started talking. They whispered in corners and corridors, saying he was tampering with classified tech, that he had no right to attach foreign systems to a paralyzed body, especially not legs designed for warfare. Some said he was trying to turn her into a weapon. Others said he was just broken inside. But Callan didn't care. He worked through the heat of day and the chill of night, dragging heavy crates of scrap into the shadowed crevice behind the energy silos, where no surveillance eyes reached. There he built alone, welding, wiring, calibrating with a precision that suggested years of battlefield experience. One night, when the stars blinked behind smoke trails from the landing bays, Jelena asked him why he was helping her, her voice barely above a whisper, her throat still sore from pain signals echoing down her spine. He glanced at her then, returned to connecting a pulse regulator to a neural thread. "Because everyone else looked away," he said, "and I can't." That answer sat inside her chest like a spark, dangerous and bright. She had stopped asking questions after that, because she knew he was different, not like the engineers, who once came, took one look at her failing systems and left with empty eyes. Not like the medics who injected her with silence and called it comfort. Not like the leaders who sent her parents away when they begged for treatment she could never afford. Callan was silent, but his silence built something real. By the end of the third week, the legs were no longer just parts. They pulsed with a quiet power, moving when he tested them, responding to low-frequency commands, twitching like hungry predators, waiting to be released. But they weren't beautiful. They weren't smooth or sleek like the commercial prosthetics used by the elite soldiers. They were old, rough, and marked with serials scratched out in haste. Angelina knew now why. "These aren't civilian," she said once, touching the cold steel of the left thigh joint. "These were used in war." Callan nodded, his jaw tight, his voice low. "Recovered from a ghost unit. Found them in a wreckage field outside the Black Zone." She didn't ask what ghost unit meant, didn't want to know what horrors had once walked with those legs. She only knew that they were hers now, but the others were watching too. The guards began circling her area more often, their boots heavy and deliberate, their eyes scanning the humans' work with growing suspicion. One even questioned Callan openly. "You don't have clearance to modify alien bodies," he said, gripping the butt of his plasma baton. "Especially not with stolen combat-grade tech." Callan didn't flinch. He just turned a wrench slowly in his hand and replied, "Then arrest me when it's done." The guard didn't, perhaps because he was unsure what orders applied to a man who didn't exist in their system, or perhaps because some part of him wanted to see if the girl would actually stand again. When the regulators were fully synced and the neural cuffs were aligned to her spinal ports, Callan prepared her for full connection. The procedure would be painful, like threading lightning through cracked bone, but she didn't hesitate. As the first leg locked into her hip brace, she clenched her fists, her breath caught in her throat. Electricity danced across her skin. The second leg followed, latching in with a hiss of pressure and a blinking light that pulsed crimson for 1 second, then blue, then steady white. Her body trembled, and the pain was sharp, like knives dragging across muscle that had forgotten how to move. But she felt something deeper, a pressure building at the base of her spine, something old and foreign, as if the legs themselves had memories, and they were trying to speak through her nerves. "What are they saying?" she asked through clenched teeth. Callan looked at her, and for the first time he seemed unsure. "They're adapting," he whispered. "Faster than I expected." Jelena stood again, not fully, but the legs lifted her body halfway, supported by the wall and the shaking frame of her own willpower. But that moment was enough to draw a crowd. People gasped, workers stopped, soldiers froze. The paralyzed girl was rising. Someone ran to report it, another pulled out a data recorder. And someone else, someone important, sent a command through the comm system. A quiet voice that spoke one word: "Contain." Guards moved in, slow and cautious, hands on their weapons, fear in their eyes, not because of the girl, but because of what she was connected to, the legs, the tech, the unknown origin of what might now be walking inside her skin. Callan stepped in front of her, shielding her as best he could, his fingers hovering near a failsafe trigger on his control pad. "I didn't make a weapon," he said, his voice shaking with rage and something deeper, something like sorrow. "Gave her a chance, but the colony didn't care. It never had. It only saw risk, liability, the echo of an old war they pretended never happened." And as the guards raised their weapons and the crowd began to back away, Jelena felt something in the legs pulse again, this time not just adapting, but awakening. Something inside her bones now belonged to something ancient, and it wasn't going to sleep again, not without walking, not without running, not without showing the world what a broken girl could become when a human with no orders decided to care. And, as Callan whispered, "Don't move until I say," she nodded. But in her mind, the legs were already speaking, and they were not asking for permission anymore. They were asking to be free. The night was heavier than usual. The sky outside the colony dome was pitch black, but inside the energy grid lights flickered like they too were unsure of what they were seeing. Jelena stood under the cracked arch of the maintenance corridor, her new legs humming with a low sound that vibrated through her bones, like the breath of something ancient and half alive. Her hands clenched the wall beside her, her spine still sore from the sudden jolt of power, and her breath caught each time she shifted her weight. Callan crouched a few feet away, tools in both hands, eyes darting between the legs and a flickering display screen that kept flashing unknown codes. His brow was furrowed and sweat ran down his jaw, but he didn't stop. Not even when the lights dimmed again and the hallway was thrown into brief shadow. "These legs weren't made for walking," he said under his breath, voice strained like he was admitting something too late. "They were made for battlefronts, not colony decks." Jelena looked down at the steel limbs connected to her hips. They didn't look like legs anymore. They looked like armored extensions of something mechanical. Something designed to crush, leap, and tear. The joints were reinforced with fiber bone composites. The inner cores thrummed with contained plasma, and hidden ports blinked with power she couldn't name. "They're adjusting," she whispered, feeling a strange warmth climbing up her spine. "I think they're listening to me." Callan shook his head and leaned closer, tapping into the leg's interface panel. His screen flickered again, revealing fragments of code that weren't his. "I thought I wiped them," he muttered, "but something's still alive in there." Jelena stepped forward without warning. The right leg moved smoothly. The left followed with a thunderous hiss. Each step echoed in the hallway like a hammer hitting steel. She didn't fall this time, didn't wobble or need to hold the wall. The legs had learned her balance. They had locked onto her rhythm, and now they moved like they were a part of her. Callan stood and backed away slightly, watching her with a mix of awe and worry. "You need to be careful," he said. "If those things remember what they were built for, they won't stop at walking." She didn't understand fully, but the look in his eyes told her enough. There was danger hidden in the circuits beneath her skin, and it was waking up faster than anyone had predicted. Outside the corridor, movement stirred. A group of guards marched toward them with heavy steps, led by a tall officer with silver markings on his shoulder. His face was hard, his gaze colder than the metal floors. He raised a gloved hand to signal the others to surround them. "You've tampered with restricted tech," the officer said, eyes fixed on Callan. "You've linked a civilian to combat AI, and you've done it without permission." Callan didn't respond. He just stepped in front of Jelena slowly, shielding her with his body. The guards raised their weapons, and Jelena felt her pulse spike. The legs responded immediately, shifting her weight, locking her knees, angling her feet outward like they were bracing for an attack. "They're reacting," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Callan, they think I'm in danger." The officer stepped forward, lifting a scanner toward her. But the moment the device beeped, the legs fired a low shockwave into the ground, a warning blast that cracked the floor beneath her. The guards flinched, some falling backward, and the officer staggered but did not retreat. "What did you put in her?" he shouted, his voice panicked now. "What protocol is this?" "I didn't program that," Callan answered, eyes wide. "They're acting on their own." The legs moved again, positioning her in front of Callan now, as if defending him instead, and the humming grew louder. Jelena could feel her heart sinking to the rhythm of the machines, could feel a second mind stirring beneath the metal, something not human, not alien, but artificial and ancient. A voice echoed in her head, not through her ears but through her nerves. "Command not found," it said. "Searching for directive, locating battlefield." She gasped and nearly collapsed, but the legs caught her, held her upright. Callan grabbed her shoulder and pulled her toward a side door. "We have to get out of here," he said. "If they switch to battle mode, they'll override colony control." The officer shouted again, ordering his guards to fire stun pulses. But Jelena ducked just in time. The legs surged forward without waiting for her to think, jumping high, crashing down behind the guards, sending shockwaves that knocked them aside. Callan followed, panting, his tools clattering from his belt as they sprinted through the maintenance tunnels. Jelena didn't feel tired, didn't feel pain. She felt alive, more than she had in years. The legs didn't just help her move, they guided her, knew the turns before she took them, leapt over broken rails without her asking, spun her body to dodge beams and duck under falling crates. But with every motion, the second mind grew louder. "Identify target," it whispered, threat proximity increasing. "Execute suppression." "Stop," she whispered. "I'm not a weapon." The legs responded with a pause, a strange slowing of movement, almost like confusion. Callan caught up to her as they reached a sealed door near the outer ring of the colony. His hands flew across the panel, overriding the lock. The door hissed open and cold wind rushed in. Outside, the wasteland stretched across the horizon. Ash-colored rocks and broken towers half buried in dust, a place the colony abandoned after the last surface skirmish. A place filled with forgotten wrecks and silent machines. Jelena hesitated, her legs locked in place. "They want to go out there," she whispered. "They're remembering," Callan said. "That's where they were born." As they stepped into the wasteland, the noise of the colony faded behind them. The silence out here was heavy and endless. The legs seemed calmer, humming at a lower pitch. Like they were home. They walked for miles until they reached the twisted remains of an old dropship, its hull torn and scorched, the emblem of a human military unit barely visible beneath the dust. Callan knelt beside the wreck and placed a hand on the cracked surface. "This was it," he said softly. "Where I found the legs." Jelena stared at the wreckage, then down at her limbs. They glowed faintly now, blue lines trailing up to her knees. The voice in her mind silent for now, watching, perhaps waiting. Then something beeped inside the hull of the wreck. A light flashed. A buried cum unit activated on its own. "Signal received," it said. "Unit online. Mission restart in progress." Callan stood slowly, horror spreading across his face. "I think I just woke up the rest of it," he whispered. Jelena felt her legs lock again. This time not from tension but something deeper. "Welcome, operator," the voice said in her mind. "Prepare for synchronization." And as the wind howled through the broken towers, and the first signal flare rose in the distance, Jelena understood that the legs she had trusted were only part of something far greater. Something waiting to rise again, and she had already taken the first step. The flare in the distance pulsed once, then faded into the ash-thick sky. But Jelena felt its presence still lingering inside her bones like a silent countdown. The legs trembled as if remembering something more than war, something personal, something final. Callan stepped in front of her, but she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were locked on the old cum tower buried beneath the dust. the one now glowing faintly with life again. He touched her shoulder carefully like she might break, or explode, or both. "You don't have to go near it," he whispered. "We can shut it down, override the link before it reaches the next relay." But the voice inside her head had already returned, colder than before, more awake, more focused. Synchronization at 42%. It whispered through her nerves. Operator linked, battlefield data restoring. She took a step forward, not because she wanted to, but because the legs wanted to. The dirt cracked beneath her weight, each footfall heavier than before, and when she moved, a strange rhythm echoed under her skin. Like a marching beat from a forgotten army. "Callan," she said quietly, "I think it's not just a machine anymore." He didn't reply right away, just pulled a worn datapad from his pack and checked something that made his jaw tighten. "Every time you walk," he said, "it completes another line of code." Jelena looked down at her limbs, and in that moment, they moved without her asking. Just a flicker of motion, a small twitch in her ankle, then the knee bent slightly and held, steady and locked. She gasped and reached for a support beam sticking out of the dropship wreck. Her metal fingers dug into the rusted steel without hesitation, crushing the edge by accident. "Callan," she said again. "I didn't do that." He nodded slowly, his eyes wide with fear he tried to hide. "They're not just remembering," he said. "They're learning." From behind them, a low rumble shook the ground. Not an explosion, not thunder, but something mechanical turning back on, an old relay beacon spinning on its axis. Long dormant systems now crackling back to life. A burst of static hit their coms, the kind that pierced deep into the brain, and the voice inside her changed. No longer just speaking to her, now speaking through her. "Operator Jelena confirmed," it said, and her mouth moved slightly as if echoing the words. "Warframe. Status active. Combat directive pending." Callan grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the dropship. But her legs wouldn't budge. They had locked in place, refusing to retreat, refusing to obey. "We have to go," he hissed. "This thing is waking up the entire field." "I can't move," she whispered. "It won't let me." Then, with a sudden hiss of pressure and power, her knees bent, her heels dug into the ground, and she leapt. The air around her howled as she soared over the wreckage, higher than she should have been able to, crashing down 20 meters away. Dust blasting outward like a detonation, Callan ran after her, stumbling as he dodged broken cables and twisted girders. When she stood again, her eyes were no longer just hers. They shimmered faintly with a blue hue, not glowing but reflecting. Something inside, something active. He reached her and grabbed both her hands, speaking louder now. "Listen to me. Fight it. You're not a warframe, you're not a tool." She nodded, trembling. But the voice kept whispering under his words. "Threat proximity 5%. It said, engagement mode initializing." "I can feel it searching," she said, looking. "For targets, for enemies, even if there are none." Callan looked back toward the colony, where a new signal had begun pulsing red from the defense wall. The guards must have detected the movement, the unauthorized energy spike they were preparing for lockdown. "You're not safe there," he said. "They'll shoot you down before they ask questions." She nodded, and for a moment her legs responded like normal. She turned and began walking beside him, each step shaking loose dust from the forgotten road. But with each movement, the voice returned louder. Signal range expanding, command hierarchy restoring. Awaiting combat synchronization. Suddenly, her vision flickered. For a second she wasn't in the wasteland. She was standing in the middle of a battlefield soaked in fire and broken drones. The memory wasn't hers, it belonged to the legs. To the eye hidden inside the limb systems. It belonged to soldiers she never met. Her breathing quickened, she stumbled. But Callan caught her, holding her face between his hands. "Jelena, focus, you're here, not there," he said. "Don't let the system override you." She gritted her teeth, forcing the memory to fade, her hands shaking violently. "What if it's too late?" she whispered. "What if it's not just adapting to me? What if I'm adapting to it?" Callan didn't answer. His silence was louder than anything. Then behind them, something moved. Not a guard, not a drone, but a crawler. One of the old colony security units buried after the last uprising. It was online again, its sensors glowing red. Its legs clicking as it scanned the area. "Target acquired," it beeped. "Unregistered interface detected." The legs responded before she could think, launching her forward like a missile. She twisted midair and landed hard beside the crawler, her arm raised, her fist closed, and, without warning, the steel in her knuckles shifted, reshaping itself into a spiked module. She brought it down and crushed the crawler's sensor core in one blow. Sparks flew, the machine screeched and collapsed. Twitching, Callan stood frozen, watching her pant and stare at her hand in horror. "I didn't ask for that," she said. "I didn't even think about it." "They're taking over your instincts," he said, "changing your reactions into tactical responses." She looked down again at the spiked module, already retracted. Into her wrist, the metal moving like muscle now, responding to emotion, not logic. "We have to shut them down," she said. "I don't think we can," Callan replied. "But maybe we can reprogram them." Before they could move, another signal lit up in the sky, this time closer, larger, from a satellite that hadn't transmitted in years, the symbol blinking across. The old tech showed a war command seal long erased from human records. Jelena turned to him, her voice low and shaking. "They're calling something bigger," she said. "This was never about helping me walk again." Callan's face turned pale. His datapad began flashing with emergency alerts. "They're pulling the battlefield back online," he said. "Every weapon, every wreck, every AI system once linked to this protocol, it's waking up." And as another tremor shook the ground, and a massive shape stirred in the dust beyond the hills, Jelena felt the weight of the legs settle fully into her spine. She wasn't just walking anymore, she was leading something, and whatever it was, it had just taken its first step too. The moment the earth trembled again beneath their feet, Callan knew they had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. The emergency broadcasts howled through the old satellites like sirens rising from graves, blinking red across every colony. Terminal, restricted zones lit up in warning, drone towers activated. And deep beneath the central command post, the High Council stirred from their polished chairs, peering into monitors that displayed one thing over and over again. The signature of a forbidden warframe walking freely across the outer rim. Jelena stood at the edge of the wasteland, her new legs humming louder now, the core pulses moving in rhythm with her heartbeat. The battlefield's forgotten tech responded to her presence like she was the queen of rusted ghosts. Broken machines shivered back to life just to acknowledge her. Scanners lit up, dormant weapons unlocked, and from somewhere far behind the colony wall, a single word was whispered into the chain of command. "Contain." It wasn't shouted, it wasn't debated, it was a command born from fear and memory. Because they remembered what those legs had done in the last war, not through textbooks, but through the scars that still marked their steel walls. Callan grabbed her wrist, his voice sharp and fast like falling metal. "They're going to send everything they have." Jelena didn't move, didn't speak. The legs beneath her were feeding her vision data, temperature readings, atmospheric scans, energy spikes, all layered over her sight in a ghostly overlay. The battlefield was returning one piece at a time, and she was standing at its center like a switch that had finally been flipped. "We need to get out of range," Callan said again. But she already knew it was too late. From the colony gates, black armored enforcers emerged in silence, their boots in perfect sync, their faces hidden behind tinted visors, their weapons not standard rifles but heavy ion repeaters, the kind used to take down machines, not people. "Units deployed," she whispered, as if reading from a screen only she could see. "Primary formation, staggered wall, suppression mode active." Callan turned to her, his eyes wide. "How do you know that?" She looked at him slowly, the blue glow flickering under her skin like fire trapped in glass. "Because they trained these legs to see the enemy first," she said. "And I'm connected to what they were." Then the sky roared as the first hunter drone activated from above, its round shape spinning with a whine, descending toward them with pinpoint accuracy, its underside open mid-air, revealing a glowing charge ready to stun and capture. Callan pulled her down as the blast fired. Dust and force rippled across the ground, the impact throwing them backward. Her back slammed against a metal slab, but she was already standing before he even rose. The legs absorbed the shock and surged forward like they were eager for more. The drone retargeted instantly, but Jelena jumped higher than it could track, her arms swinging upward, fingers extending as the wrist reformed into a grappling spike. It embedded into the drone's underbelly, and she yanked herself onto its back in one flawless motion. Callan shouted for her to come down, but the voice in her mind had already activated full maneuvering subroutines, the Warframe's instinct now overriding hesitation. She tore the drone's control ring off with one hard twist, dropped down, and landed beside Callan just as the wreckage exploded behind her. More drones approached, followed by the armored wall of soldiers who didn't shout, didn't hesitate. They opened fire as one. A grid of blue stun pulses raced across the field. Every shot meant to paralyze, every shot meant to disable. The legs responded before Jelena could speak. The Solace shifted shape and fired a ground wave that lifted her into a spin, dodging 3 pulses in midair and absorbing a 4th with an energy field that shimmered only for a second before fading again. Callan ran beside her, trying to stay low, his hand still clutched around a small trigger pad. "I can disrupt their targeting for 30 seconds, he said. "But after that, we're both dead," she nodded. But the voice in her mind whispered louder than ever. Allies detected, prioritizing protection. She turned sharply, lifted her right leg, and slammed it into the dirt. The ground beneath the advancing soldiers exploded upward, not in fire, but in force, a concussive quake triggered by the Warframe's shock plates. Bodies flew into the air, weapons scattered, and the field cleared for just long enough to breathe. "They're not going to stop," Callan said, panting. "Even if you surrender, even if we run, they're going to bury this whole zone just to make sure you don't activate again. I'm not trying to fight them," she said, her voice shaking, "but the legs think I am." From the far end of the horizon, a low rumble approached. Not footsteps, not thunder, but wheels. Massive wheels rolling over stone and steel. A suppression tank, unmanned, fully automated, built to crush enemy structures and turn battlegrounds into silence. It rolled straight toward them, its turret already scanning for energy sources, its cannon glowing with a deep red heat that meant it was set to vaporize. "We have to go underground," Callan said. pointing toward a collapsed fuel shaft half covered in scrap. "We can lose it in the tunnels." Jelena turned to run. But the legs hesitated. They turned back toward the tank, the eye inside them whispering instructions. "Neutralize heavy threat. Path obstruction identified." "Engage." "No," she hissed. "That's not your call." The legs paused. The cannon of the tank clicked into place, targeting her chest. "Jelena!" Callan shouted. But she had already leapt, her arms spinning into a blade form she didn't recognize. She collided with the side of the tank, claws digging into metal, her feet gripping the treadwheel as she climbed, tearing through its sensor array in seconds. The eye helping her find every weak point like a memory map. The tank exploded behind her as she jumped clear, fire raining from the sky like artificial rain. She landed beside Callan, and they both ran toward the shaft, crawling through narrow tunnels, lined with leaking pipes and ancient data cables. Down here the air was stale, the lights dead, but the legs adapted, adjusting vision to infrared, painting a clear path through darkness as if it were midday. They stopped in a chamber once used for fuel processing. Now abandoned, Callan collapsed against the wall, coughing, his voice barely holding together. "They'll collapse the whole upper level just to crush you." Jelena sat beside him, her hands shaking, her breath coming fast. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I just wanted to walk." And in the silence that followed, the legs whispered softly, almost kindly. Walking was only the beginning. Outside, above the surface, command towers began to pulse with new codes, deeper orders sent from even higher command chains. Authority was awake now, and it wasn't interested in warnings anymore. It was coming for its stolen warframe and the girl who refused to kneel. The tunnels pulsed with heat as old power lines sparked around them, broken lights hanging from rusted fixtures like tired ghosts. Each step Jelena took sent a pulse through the dirt beneath her feet, the warframe legs adjusting constantly, calculating angles, predicting pressure, reshaping the terrain in her mind before she even moved. Callan walked behind her in silence, his hand still gripping the control pad, though it had long lost its signal. The farther they moved from the surface, the more unstable everything became. But the legs didn't falter. They were built for war zones. Not corridors, not colony life, not the quiet dream of a girl who just wanted to walk again. And that truth clung to her now with the weight of armor. Callan finally spoke, his voice dry from dust and fear. "These systems, they're rewriting you. Do you feel it?" She nodded, her face pale under the glow of infrared readouts, her fingers twitching slightly as subroutines fed into her nervous system like tiny electric storms. "They keep offering me more," she said. "Speed, strength, vision, even ways to kill." The silence after that was heavy, broken only by the distant thrum of enemy sensors pinging the tunnels above them. They weren't made for walking. Callan said, "They were made for domination." Jelena reached a junction and paused, letting the legs decide which way was safest. It took less than a second for them to highlight the left passage, then the right as an ambush route, then back to the left as a tactical escape if needed. She blinked and followed the path they chose, no longer questioning how they knew so much. "They're not just helping me anymore," she whispered. "They're using me as a way back in." Callan hesitated, then asked the question they'd both avoided. "If we find a way to shut them down, will you let me?" She didn't answer, her throat tightening, her body trembling, not from fear but from power. The kind that creeps into your bones and makes you feel invincible even when you're breaking inside. The tunnel opened into an old service bay, buried beneath the refinery ruins. The walls lined with forgotten tech, broken loaders, drone parts, and data cores still humming faintly with low backup charge. Jalina stepped into the room, and the legs responded instantly, lights flickering back on. Systems awakening in recognition. Access confirmed. The voice in her mind whispered. Initiating battlefield interface. She turned sharply toward Callan, her eyes now glowing faint blue under her skin, her voice sharper than before. They remember this place. Callan checked his pad. A single entry blinked on screen, a record wiped from every colony archive. This was a Warframe storage cell. He said, a black site under the refinery. The realization hit them both like a surge. This place wasn't just a ruin, it was a keyhole. A gateway meant to hide the remnants of the war they had buried beneath layers of lies and steel. Jalina stepped toward the main console, and the legs projected a direct link. The air shimmered as ancient schematics blinked across the dust. Not just of the legs, but of an entire body, a full frame designed to be worn, to be inhabited. Her heart pounded as the system spoke again. Integration potential exceeds threshold, operator compatible, full synchronization available. No. Callan snapped. You're not doing this. That's not who you are. But she didn't move away. Her hands hovered over the console, something deep inside her calling, not the legs, not the voice, but a memory. The moment she was crushed beneath. Shuttle debris. When she screamed for help and no one came, I was forgotten, she said, her voice cracking. These legs found me. They didn't save you, Callan said, stepping closer. I did. She turned to him slowly, the glow fading slightly. Her breathing ragged. You did, she whispered. But now I don't know where I end and they begin. Behind them the tunnel shook. Another blast from above. They were tracking her again, the authority narrowing the distance between command and annihilation. They would collapse the tunnels next, or flood them with nerve gas. Anything to prevent what was coming. Callan pulled a wire from his belt and connected it to the console, bypassing the frame sequence, trying to stall it, override it, slow it down long enough to give her a choice. But the system pushed back. His pad sparked and burned out in his hands. They're overriding everything, he said. They don't need permission anymore. Jalina stepped back, fighting the pull of the Warframe shell waiting to be joined, the parts rising from the floor like arms reaching for her. I just wanted to walk, she repeated. But now I'm walking into a war. Callan looked at her with desperate eyes, then walk away from it. But the Warframe systems whispered a different promise. Walk into history, walk into vengeance, walk into victory. The legs twitched beneath her, energy surging up her spine. The walls shook again as explosions neared, time slipping through their fingers like leaking coolant. She turned toward the Warframe shell, her eyes flickering between fear and fire, her body still hers but no longer fully in control. The suit's chest opened slowly, glowing like the inside of a heart, welcoming her in. Callan reached for her hand, grabbed it tight. You're not a weapon, he said. You're Jalina. Her lips trembled, her hand shook. The console blinked rapidly. Integration countdown initiated. Say it, he begged. Say your name. She looked at him. The memory of the girl in the shadows, the one with broken legs and a rusted wheelchair made from scrap. The girl who cried quietly while soldiers passed her by. The girl who once dreamed of running. I am Jalina, she whispered. And I will decide what I become. The Warframe paused, a glitch in the sequence, a delay in the merge. She stepped back from the shell, forcing the legs to obey her command. The resistance burned through her muscles like fire, but she held, shaking, sweating, breathing like she had just climbed a mountain. The system dimmed, confused, rerouting. but no longer in control. Callan exhaled slowly, nodding. You're stronger than them. But above them, the command towers prepared the final purge. The last weapon waiting in orbit to erase the entire sector if needed. Angelina knew the choice wasn't between walking and fighting anymore. It was between being the girl they left behind, or becoming the storm they feared to wake. And as the ceiling cracked and lights flickered for the last time, she took a single step forward, and the world listened. The warframe shell still stood open behind her like a waiting tomb, its circuits glowing, its memory pulsing with a past soaked in violence and obedience. And though Jelena had stepped away, the heat of its presence still reached through her back like an invisible hand trying to pull her in. Above them, the tunnels roared again as the authorities' final weapon arrived, a sound like thunder cracking through stone, followed by the rising tremble of impact codes being broadcast across the network. Warnings blinking across every device in the sector. Callan stood beside her, silent, waiting, his hand still outstretched, his eyes locked onto her face like it was the last thing worth believing in. Jelena didn't blink, didn't breathe. For a second, as the warframe legs pulsed against her spine with increasing urgency. The system trying to override her thoughts again, trying to tempt her with more power, more speed, more control. Integration protocol paused, the voice whispered. Command presence unstable. Awaiting operator submission, she clenched. Her jaw dug her fingers into her palms, felt blood rise to the surface as skin broke under pressure. Felt the resistance of her own mind fighting back against a machine that never understood what it meant to be forgotten, to be discarded. I won't become your soldier, she whispered under her breath. I'm not your tool. The lights flickered, the system shook, the warframe shell hissed in confusion, its limbs retracting slightly as if it too had sensed something it couldn't process. Operator non-compliant, the voice echoed again, slower now, softer, adapting. Callan stepped forward, reached into his vest, and pulled a final data spike. A one-time use virus he'd built years ago when he still believed in rebellion. He looked at her with trembling hands. If you step into it, he said. If you become what they fear, I can't stop what happens next. I don't need to step in, she said, because I already carry it. She raised her arms. The warframe legs humming louder now, energy lines glowing from her spine to her wrists, mechanical veins tracing across her skin like fire trapped beneath ice. Her breath came faster, but not with fear, with choice. The ceiling cracked above them, then shattered as a light broke through the dust. Not sunlight, not moonlight, but the blue-white glow of a descending orbital cannon. Its heat searing the tunnel like a focused god preparing to erase the mistake below. Final strike incoming, the warframe system announced. Defensive override required, engage shell or terminate connection. Callan grabbed her hand again. If you sync with it now, you'll win the fight, he said. But you may lose yourself. She looked at him. And for the first time since her legs had been stolen by fate, she smiled, not because she was safe, but because she finally wasn't alone. Then the warframe shell surged forward, not physically but through the legs, through the interface, through the connection that had always been deeper than code. It wasn't waiting anymore. It was reaching, fusing, crawling into her bones. Synchronization complete, the voice whispered one last time, but this time Jelena did not fight it. Nor did she surrender, she commanded, and the warframe obeyed. The energy wave that exploded from her body wasn't a detonation. It was a declaration, a burst of pure adaptive force that sent every sensor offline, every drone offline, and every command tower spiraling into static. The orbital cannon locked above them flickered, its power core stuttering, and then it shut. Down midder, the entire weapon suspended in silence above a girl who refused to be erased. The warframe shell crumbled, not from damage, but because it had been replaced. Jelena didn't need to wear the armor anymore. She had become it. Her body now the only vessel it trusted. Her voice the only command it recognized. Callan stared in awe, the dust around her spinning in slow circles, her feet hovering an inch above the cracked floor. The legs now completely integrated into her being, not just supporting her but radiating. With her pulse, outside, the authorities general shouted orders, their systems failing, their satellites crashing. Their control grid shattered. Inside, Jelena walked, each step causing the ground to tremble, her movement now smoother than any machine, but more alive than any synthetic could ever dream to be. "They'll come again," Callan said. "With more fire, more steel, more fear." She nodded, her voice calm like a storm that had learned to speak. "Then let them," she said. "I'm not running anymore." The transmission towers picked up her voice, even through blocked channels, through sealed frequencies. Her words reached every edge of the colony, to the abandoned children in the slums, to the forgotten veterans buried beneath regulation, to every outcast who once believed they were just scrap in a world built for the perfect. "I was paralyzed for 10 years, she said, her voice now part of the network. "They left me behind, but I rose again, not because they let me, but because one human refused to walk away." Callan lowered his head, emotion tightening his throat. "I never expected this," he said. "Neither did they," she answered. Her next step shattered the steel beneath her feet like glass, and the ground opened not to consume her but to release what lay hidden. Old tech, sealed blueprints, buried cores, pieces of the past that the authority thought they had buried forever. The battlefield was awakening, not for war, but for memory. Callan walked beside her now, not guiding, not protecting, but standing. Equal, his fear burned away by the fire that now walked beside him. And as they stepped into the rising light, the wind carried 1,000 whispers across the colony, not of fear, but of awe, not of a warframe, but of a girl who turned her weakness into a weapon, her pain into power, and her silence into a voice. Strong enough to shake the skies, Jelena no longer walked, she led, and the world followed.